I never thought I'd be the one to tear my family apart, but sometimes love means making the hardest choice imaginable. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I lost not just my baby brother, but the sister who raised us when no one else would. It's a story about sacrifice, betrayal, and the devastating price of a single selfish decision that changed everything forever. Growing up in our small house in Columbus, Ohio, my older sister Rachel was more than just a sibling. She was everything. When our mother disappeared into her own world of addiction and late-night shifts at the casino, Rachel stepped up without hesitation. She was only 16 then, barely old enough to drive, but she became our mother, father, protector, and provider all rolled into one. I can still see her in my mind's eye, standing at the kitchen counter at 5:30 in the morning, making 3 different lunches because I hated peanut butter. Our brother Mason was allergic to everything under the sun, and our youngest sister Sophie needed her sandwiches cut into perfect triangles or she wouldn't eat them. Rachel would braid Sophie's hair while helping me with my math homework, all while keeping one eye on 6-year-old Mason to make sure he wasn't getting into anything that could trigger his severe allergies. She'd work double shifts at the diner on Main Street, coming home with her feet so swollen she could barely walk, but she'd still help us with our school projects and read bedtime stories until we fell asleep. The money she made went straight to groceries, school supplies, and most importantly, Mason's medical needs. His EpiPens alone cost $400 each, and he needed to have them everywhere he went. I remember the day she bought his first set of EpiPens with her own money. She'd saved for 2 months, picking up extra shifts and eating nothing but leftover fries from the diner. When she came home with that little orange case, she sat us all down at the kitchen table and taught us how to use it. She made us practice over and over with the trainer pen until even little Sophie could do it with her eyes closed. Rachel's hands shook as she showed us how to jam it into Mason's thigh and count to 10, her voice breaking when she said that these 10 seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Those early years blur together now, a montage of Rachel doing everything while our mother drifted further away. Parent-teacher conferences where Rachel would show up in her waitress uniform, still smelling like coffee and bacon grease. School plays where she'd sit in the front row cheering louder than all the other parents combined. Halloween costumes she'd sew by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. Christmas mornings where she'd wrap presents in newspaper because that's all we had, but somehow made it magical anyway. She gave up her spot at Ohio State University to take care of us. I found her acceptance letter years later, hidden in a shoebox under her bed, along with a scholarship offer for academic excellence. She could have been anything she wanted, but instead she chose us. She chose to wake up at dawn to get us ready for school, to work until midnight to pay the bills, to spend her weekends at Mason's allergy specialist appointments instead of at college parties with kids her own age. By the time Rachel turned 22, she'd been raising us for 6 years. 6 years of putting everyone else first. 6 years of no social life, no dating, no dreams of her own. Her friends from high school had all graduated college and started careers while Rachel was still wearing the same waitress uniform, still coming home to 3 kids who needed help with homework and dinner and a million other things. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching, the longing in her face when she scrolled through Facebook, seeing everyone else living their lives. That's why when she met James, I was genuinely happy for her. He came into the diner one Tuesday morning, ordered black coffee and wheat toast, and apparently spent the next 2 hours working on his laptop while stealing glances at Rachel. He came back the next day and the next, always sitting in her section, always leaving enormous tips. It took him 2 weeks to work up the courage to ask her out, and when he finally did, Rachel's whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She floated around the house that night, humming while she did the dishes, smiling at nothing in particular. She asked me 3 times if her blue dress looked okay, if her hair was all right, if she should wear different shoes. It was like watching my sister transform back into the young woman she should have been all along, someone with hopes and possibilities beyond our little house and its endless needs. But she turned James down. She said she couldn't date anyone because she had responsibilities, because who would watch us if she went out? Because what kind of person would want to date someone with 3 kids to take care of? I watched her delete his number from her phone, watched her smile fade back into that resigned expression she wore like armor against wanting things for herself. James kept coming to the diner, though. He'd order his coffee and toast, leave his tips, and chat with Rachel about safe topics like the weather and local sports teams. Slowly, over months, they became friends. He learned about us, about our situation, about why Rachel couldn't date. And instead of running away like she expected, he started asking about us too. He'd send little gifts with Rachel, colouring books for Sophie, a football keychain for Mason, a gift card for my favourite bookstore. 3 years passed like this. 3 years of James patiently waiting, of Rachel slowly letting her guard down, of stolen moments of conversation between coffee refills. 3 years of Rachel saying maybe someday, when the kids were older, when things were more stable, when she had more time. 3 years of life passing her by while she continued to sacrifice everything for us. I was 20 by then, working part-time at Target while taking community college classes online. I could have helped more with Mason and Sophie, should have insisted Rachel take some time for herself, but I was selfish too in my own way. It was easier to let Rachel handle everything like she always had, easier to focus on my own life while she continued to carry the weight of our family on her shoulders. The day everything changed started like any other Saturday in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting our neighbourhood in shades of amber and gold. Rachel had finally agreed to a proper lunch date with James. He'd made reservations at Marcello's, this fancy Italian place downtown that required reservations weeks in advance. Rachel had been talking about it all week. Her excitement barely contained as she planned what to wear, how to do her hair, what to talk about on her first real date in 6 years. I was supposed to watch Mason at the park that day. Just for a few hours, I told Rachel. She deserved this. She deserved one afternoon to feel like a 25-year-old woman instead of a substitute parent. She'd been hesitant, going over Mason's allergy list 3 times, making sure I had his EpiPen, reminding me about checking food labels and watching for cross-contamination. But eventually, she agreed. She put on her yellow sundress, the one that made her look like sunshine itself, and left for her date with a promise to be back by 3 o'clock. Mason and I walked to Riverside Park around 11 that morning. He was in such a good mood, chattering about his upcoming 7th birthday, how he wanted a bicycle with training wheels and a helmet with flames on it. He ran ahead of me on the path, his little legs pumping as he raced toward the playground, his laughter carried on the autumn breeze. I remember thinking how normal it all felt, how nice it was to just be a big sister taking her little brother to the park, not worrying about bills or responsibilities or any of the heavy stuff that usually clouded our days. The playground was busy with weekend families, kids climbing and sliding and swinging while parents chatted on benches. Mason immediately joined a group of boys playing Pirates on the Jungle Gym, their imaginations turning metal and plastic into ships and seas. I found a bench where I could see him and pulled out my phone, scrolling through social media while keeping one eye on his bright blue jacket as he played. That's when I met Catalina Arias. She sat down next to me with her own son, a boy about Mason's age with the same boundless energy. We started chatting the way parents and caregivers do at parks, comparing notes on schools and activities, lamenting how fast kids grow up. She was warm and funny, with the kind of laugh that made you want to keep talking just to hear it again. Her son Miguel joined the pirate game, and soon he and Mason were best friends in that instant way only children can manage. It was 12:15 when it happened. Such a specific time, burned into my memory forever. Miguel had been sharing his snack with all the pirate crew, little bags of what looked like regular granola clusters. I was half paying attention, mostly focused on a funny video Catalina was showing me on her phone, when I heard Mason's voice cut through the playground noise. "Emma, my mouth feels funny." Those 5 words changed everything. I looked up to see Mason standing by the slide, his hand at his throat, his face already beginning to change. The other kids were still playing, oblivious to the crisis unfolding, but I knew. God, I knew immediately what was happening. I flew off the bench, my phone clattering to the ground as I ran to him. His lips were swelling, his breathing already laboured as I dropped to my knees in front of him. My hands shook as I unzipped his backpack, fingers fumbling with the familiar blue case that should have held his EpiPen. Should have, but didn't. "Where's your EpiPen?" I asked, even though I could see the empty case. Even though I already knew the answer that would haunt me forever. Mason's eyes went wide with fear, real terror that no 6-year-old should ever experience. "Rachel has it," he whispered, his voice already changing as his throat began to close. "She said she'd bring it." The world tilted on its axis. Everything else faded away. The playground noise, the other children. Everything except Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to breathe and the phone in my shaking hands as I called Rachel. It was 12:17. I know because I stared at the clock on my phone as it rang, willing her to answer, willing this to be a nightmare I could wake up from. She answered on the third ring, and I could hear it immediately. Restaurant sounds. Clinking glasses, soft music, laughter. The sounds of a normal Saturday lunch in a world that was still spinning correctly for everyone but us. "This better be important," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, the happiness of finally being on a real date. "Mason's having a reaction. Where are you with his EpiPen?" The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. "I'm at lunch with James. What do you mean, reaction?" "Rachel, he ate peanuts. His throat is closing." I tried to keep my voice calm, but Mason was pulling at his shirt collar, his breath coming in horrible, wheezing gasps. "Are you kidding me right now? You're supposed to be watching him. I'm at Marcello's. I'm finally having a nice time." "I need the EpiPen now. Please, Rachel, he needs it now." That's when she said the words that would destroy us all. "I'm supposed to be 25 and having a life. This is the first time James could get reservations at this place. Can't you handle it?" "He needs his EpiPen now," I was screaming by then, not caring who heard, not caring about anything except the little boy whose lips were turning blue. "I've been raising you kids since I was 16. 16! This is literally the only afternoon I've had to myself in months." "Rachel, please!" But she'd already made her choice. I could hear James in the background asking if everything was okay, could hear her telling him it was fine, just family drama, nothing to worry about. By 12:23, Mason had collapsed. His small body just crumpled to the wood chips like a puppet with cut strings. His face was swollen beyond recognition, his breathing reduced to tiny, desperate gasps that barely moved his chest. Catalina was already on the phone with 911, her voice calm and clear as she gave our location, described Mason's condition, stayed on the line with the dispatcher while I held my baby brother and watched him die one breath at a time. I called Rachel again at 12:25, my voice breaking as I sobbed into the phone. "He's unconscious. He's turning blue. Rachel, please, I'm begging you. Stop being dramatic. You always do this when I'm finally doing something for myself. This is an emergency. Everything's an emergency when I'm not available. Funny how that works." Her voice was cold, annoyed, like I was a telemarketer interrupting her meal instead of her sister watching her brother die. The paramedics arrived at 12:31, 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours. 8 minutes of watching Mason's chest barely rise and fall, of feeling how cold his little hands were getting, of whispering promises I couldn't keep about how everything would be okay. The EMT's face went pale when she checked his airways. They moved with the kind of controlled urgency that told me everything I needed to know. This was bad. This was beyond bad. "He needs epinephrine now," the EMT said, already preparing equipment. "You don't have any?" "My sister has it. She's coming." But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Rachel wasn't coming. She'd made that clear. I called her again at 12:35, Catalina's hand on my shoulder as I sobbed into the phone. The lead paramedic took it from me, her voice professional but urgent. "Mom, your brother is in anaphylactic shock. His airways are closing. We need that EpiPen immediately." Rachel's response was loud enough for everyone to hear, her words carrying across the playground like poison. "I've been his mother since our actual mother checked out. Don't lecture me about what he needs. Mom, he will die without immediate intervention. I haven't had a real date in 3 years. 3 years. I deserve 2 hours. 2 hours to be a normal person. The paramedic's expression went from professional to horrified. Mom, I need you to understand. Your brother is dying. I'll leave when dessert's done. Those 5 words. 5 simple words that ended Mason's life as surely as if she'd put a gun to his head. I'll leave when dessert's done, while his brain starved for oxygen, while his heart struggled to pump blood through his swollen throat, while his organs began shutting down one by one, she chose tiramisu over his life. At 12:42, they intubated him in the ambulance. I watched them force a tube down his tiny throat, watched his chest rise and fall with artificial breath, watched the monitors show numbers I didn't understand, but knew were bad from the way the EMTs kept looking at each other. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and medical jargon, and my own desperate prayers to any god who might be listening. I texted Rachel a photo from the ambulance, Mason surrounded by tubes and wires, his face unrecognizable beneath the swelling. Her response came 30 seconds later. This is exactly why I never get to be happy. I finally meet someone who doesn't know I'm raising 3 kids and you ruin it. Thanks for that. 12:48. That's when Mason's heart stopped. Such a small moment for such a catastrophic event. Just a flat line on a monitor, a shrill alarm, EMTs moving with renewed urgency as they started compressions on his tiny chest. They got it beating again after 2 minutes that lasted a lifetime, but the damage was done. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they stopped meeting my gaze, in the careful way they chose their words. Rachel finally arrived at the hospital at 1:33, still in her yellow sundress, her makeup smeared but her hair still perfect. James dropped her at the entrance, and she stormed into the ER like she was the victim in all this. She threw the EpiPen bag at the nurse's desk. Here, happy now? He thinks I'm a teen mom. Date's ruined. The doctor emerged from the trauma room, his scrubs splattered with blood, his face grave. We need to discuss organ donation. Rachel actually laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed off the sterile walls. What? Just give him the shot. Mom. The doctor's voice was gentle but firm. Your brother went 51 minutes without epinephrine. He's brain dead. The transformation was instant. Rachel whipped around to face me, her face contorted with rage. This is your fault. You were watching him. You had his EpiPen. You were supposed to be there. I'm always supposed to be there. When do I get to live? When is it my turn? She was screaming now, her voice raw with years of resentment I'd never fully understood until that moment. Mom, the doctor interrupted, the window for organ donation is closing. But Rachel was already on her phone, already calling lawyers, already trying to find someone else to blame. The paramedics should have had epinephrine. This is medical malpractice. I'm going to sue everyone. She left 20 minutes later, said James was waiting, that they were going to try to salvage their date, that she'd be back later. She never came back. Not while Mason was still technically alive, machines breathing for him, his little hand growing cold in mine despite the warm room. At 2:45, while Rachel was back at Marcello's trying to explain to James why she wasn't really a bad person, while she was probably ordering that dessert she'd chosen over Mason's life, the doctors disconnected the machines. I held him as he left us, really left us, his body finally still after fighting so hard to stay. Mason died at 6 years old because the person who was supposed to protect him decided her happiness mattered more than his life. He died because Rachel wanted to finish her tiramisu. He died because after years of sacrifice, she chose the one moment when that sacrifice actually mattered to put herself first. I sat with his body for 3 hours. The hospital chapel was cold and empty, but I couldn't leave him alone. Not again. Not after I'd already failed him once. I memorized every detail of his face, the way his hair stuck up in the back no matter how much you combed it, the tiny scar on his chin from when he fell off his bike last summer, the way his hand felt so impossibly small in mine. Rachel texted once during those 3 hours. James doesn't want to date someone with baggage. Thanks for ruining the only good thing in my life. That's when something inside me hardened into diamond-sharp clarity. My grief transformed into purpose. Rachel had killed our brother for a date that didn't even work out, and she was still making herself the victim. She would face consequences for this, not revenge, but justice. Mason deserved that much. The next hours passed in a haze of necessary tasks and building determination. I knew I had to document everything while it was fresh, while the horror of it was still sharp enough to capture in words. I started with my phone, screenshotting every text message Rachel had sent that day, 27 screenshots in total, each timestamped, each showing her choosing herself over Mason's life. The one at 12:18, where she said she deserved a life. The one at 12:24, where she complained about me being dramatic. The one at 12:36, where she said she'd leave when dessert was done. Each message was a nail in the coffin of our relationship, but also evidence of her callous disregard for Mason's life. I uploaded everything to 3 different cloud services, emailed copies to multiple accounts, saved them on flash drives. I'd watched enough true crime shows to know evidence could disappear, especially when families closed ranks to protect their own. But I wasn't protecting Rachel. Not anymore. Mason needed someone to stand for him, and if that meant standing against the sister who'd raised me, then so be it. Catalina called while I was sitting in the hospital family room, typing out a timeline on their ancient computer. She'd been thinking about us since the paramedics left, couldn't stop replaying what she'd witnessed. Her voice was shaky as she offered to write down everything she'd seen and heard. She'd been close enough to hear Rachel through my phone, heard her say she deserved 2 hours to be normal while Mason's airways closed. She promised to email her statement by morning, said she'd include every detail she could remember. Having a witness felt like the first ray of light in the darkness. Someone else had seen Rachel's choice. Someone else could confirm I wasn't exaggerating or misremembering in my grief. Catalina's statement would be crucial, and her willingness to help gave me the strength to take the next steps. I called Rachel the next morning at 9 after setting my phone to record. Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings, something I'd looked up at 3 a.m. while planning my approach. I needed her to admit what she'd done, needed her own words to confirm her choices that day. She answered rough-voiced and bitter. "What? We need to talk about Mason's funeral arrangements." The explosion was immediate and exactly what I'd hoped for. She screamed about how this was my fault, how I should have watched him better, how she'd sacrificed everything for us ungrateful brats. For 10 minutes she ranted without pause, admitting she knew he was dying but stayed at the restaurant anyway. She confirmed she'd heard the paramedics say he would die, confirmed she chose to finish her meal, confirmed every horrible detail while my phone captured it all. "I finally met someone who didn't know about you kids," she screamed. "James was perfect, and you ruined it. You ruined the one chance I had at happiness." When she finally ran out of venom, I calmly told her the funeral home needed decisions today. She hung up on me, but I had what I needed. Her confession, in her own voice, that she'd chosen a date over saving Mason's life. The next days blurred together in a haze of research and determination. I spent hours reading about child endangerment laws, negligent homicide, duty of care. Every legal website confirmed what I already knew, that Rachel had committed a crime. She had a legal obligation to protect Mason, knew he would die without his medication, and chose to ignore that knowledge for her own benefit. The CPS hotline answered on the second ring. I spent over an hour telling the intake worker everything, reading Rachel's texts word for word, playing portions of the recorded call. The worker's typing grew more furious as the story progressed, her professional composure cracking when I described Mason's final moments. She gave me a case number and strict instructions to file a police report immediately. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner, but the officer who took my report was kind and thorough. His expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed my evidence, calling over a supervisor when he saw the timestamps on Rachel's messages. They took my formal statement over 2 hours, asking detailed questions about our family situation, about Rachel's role as guardian, about Mason's medical history. The detective who was assigned to the case called 2 days later. Detective Martinez had been working child crimes for 15 years, and even she seemed shaken by the evidence I'd compiled. She scheduled a formal interview, wanting to go through everything again with a fine-tooth comb. Meanwhile, CPS investigator Judith Sterling contacted me about our youngest sister Sophie. I'd been so focused on justice for Mason that I'd almost forgotten Sophie was still living with Rachel, still dependent on someone who'd proven she'd choose herself over a child's life. Judith implemented an emergency safety plan immediately. Rachel could no longer be alone with Sophie, would need supervised visits only. The funeral was a special kind of torture. We couldn't agree on anything, so we held separate viewings. Rachel wanted a big production where she could perform her grief, tell everyone how hard her life had been, how much she'd sacrificed. I wanted something quiet and respectful, focused on Mason rather than Rachel's need for sympathy. Family members split into camps. Some surrounded Rachel as she wailed about giving up her youth, her dreams, her entire life for us ungrateful children. Others came to me quietly, their eyes holding knowledge they didn't speak aloud. Uncle Pete pressed my hand and whispered that he'd known Rachel was selfish, but never imagined she'd go this far. Aunt Helen hugged Rachel and called her a saint, and I had to leave before I screamed the truth for everyone to hear. Catalina came to the service bringing white flowers and quiet support. She stood with me in the back as Rachel performed her grief up front, crying prettily while talking about herself, rather than the little boy in the casket. Several other parents from the playground came too, forming a protective circle around me as Rachel's supporters shot daggers our way. The district attorney's office contacted me the week after the funeral. Brad Wallace would be handling the case, and he wanted to review everything personally. I showed up to his cluttered office with 3 copies of all my evidence, organized in color-coded folders with typed indexes. He spent 2 hours reviewing everything, asking pointed questions about timeline, about Rachel's understanding of Mason's condition, about her pattern of behavior. To prove criminal negligence, he explained, we need to establish that she had a legal duty to protect Mason, that she understood the consequences of not providing his medication, and that she consciously chose to ignore that duty. Your evidence is compelling, but we need more. He subpoenaed phone records, 911 calls, EMT run sheets, medical records, every piece of official documentation that could corroborate my timeline. He interviewed the paramedics who'd worked on Mason, the doctors who'd tried to save him, the 911 operator who'd fielded my desperate calls. Rachel hired a lawyer, of course, started threatening me with cease and desist letters, claiming I was harassing her, defaming her, ruining her reputation. She posted all over social media about being persecuted after sacrificing her youth to raise ungrateful siblings. Her friends rallied around her, sharing posts about how hard it is to be a young caregiver, how society doesn't appreciate women who give up everything for family. But for every supportive comment she received, someone else privately messaged me. Parents who'd seen her at school events, always on her phone, always impatient with the kids. Neighbours who'd noticed Sophie playing alone in the yard while Rachel was inside. Her co-workers from the diner who'd heard her complain endlessly about being stuck with us. The grand jury was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral. Brad prepared me carefully, warning that testifying would be brutal but necessary. I practiced my timeline until I could recite it without crying, learned to stick to facts rather than emotions, prepared myself to face questions that would try to make me the villain in Mason's death. The morning of my testimony, I put on the outfit Jonah had helped me choose: professional but not severe, respectful but not defeated. I threw up twice from nerves but forced myself to eat toast and drive to the courthouse. The grand jury room was smaller than I'd expected, more intimate and somehow more intimidating because of it. For 3 hours I walked them through that September day. I showed them photos of Mason from that morning, happy and alive and excited about the playground. I showed them the screenshots of Rachel's messages, reading each one aloud in a steady voice while jury members wiped their eyes. I showed them the photo I'd taken in the ambulance. Mason surrounded by tubes and wires, fighting for a life that was already lost. The prosecutor asked me to read specific texts out loud, Rachel saying she deserved a life while Mason couldn't breathe. Rachel saying she'd finished dessert while his heart stopped. Rachel calling me dramatic while his brain died from lack of oxygen. My voice shook, but I got through them all watching the jury's faces shift from skepticism to horror to rage. The EMT who'd responded to the park testified next. She was professional and clinical, explaining in medical terms exactly how anaphylaxis works, how the throat swells, how organs shut down without oxygen. She confirmed that epinephrine within 10 minutes would have saved Mason with no permanent damage. She confirmed that by the time they arrived, he was already in severe distress that could have been prevented. When asked directly if the delay in epinephrine killed Mason, she didn't hesitate. Yes. If he'd received epinephrine within the first 15 minutes of the reaction, he would be alive today. The 70-minute delay made his death inevitable. The restaurant subpoenaed their records, confirming Rachel's reservation, her arrival time, when she'd ordered, when she'd paid. James was subpoenaed too, though he tried everything to avoid testifying. His deposition confirmed everything. Yes, Rachel knew Mason was having an allergic reaction. Yes, she knew it was life-threatening. Yes, she chose to order and eat dessert anyway. Yes, she'd said she deserved one afternoon to herself after raising her siblings. His testimony was devastating for Rachel's defense. Her own date confirmed she'd made a conscious choice, confirmed she understood the stakes, confirmed she'd decided her happiness mattered more than Mason's life. 2 days after the grand jury, Brad called with the news. They'd indicted Rachel for felony child endangerment resulting in death. Up to 10 years in prison, though he warned me again that first-time offenders rarely got the maximum. Still, it was something. It was acknowledgement that what she'd done was criminal, not just selfish. Rachel's arraignment was scheduled for the following week. She showed up in a conservative black suit, her lawyer arguing for minimal bail since she wasn't a flight risk. But the judge had reviewed the evidence, had seen the texts and timeline, had read the EMT's report about Mason dying while Rachel ate dessert. He set bail at $50,000 and ordered her to surrender her passport. The local news picked up the story, though they were careful not to use names since Sophie was still a minor. Local woman charged in child's allergy death ran below the fold, but social media filled in the gaps quickly. Rachel's carefully curated victim narrative began to crumble as more people learned the truth about that September afternoon. Her job at the diner disappeared when customers started asking if she was the woman who let her brother die for Italian food. Her social media supporters dwindled as details emerged about her choosing tiramisu over a dying child. James, unsurprisingly, wanted nothing to do with her once the reality of dating someone facing felony charges set in. Meanwhile, I focused on Sophie. The emergency custody hearing established me as her temporary guardian while CPS completed their investigation. She was so quiet those first weeks, processing grief and confusion about why she couldn't go home, why Rachel was only allowed to see her at the CPS office with a social worker watching. I enrolled her in grief counselling, found a therapist who specialised in childhood trauma. We established routines, homework at the kitchen table, dinner at 6:30, bedtime stories even though she claimed she was too old for them. Slowly she began to trust that I wouldn't disappear, wouldn't choose something else over her needs. The trial date was set for 6 months after Mason's death. But 3 months in, Rachel's lawyer approached Brad about a plea deal. She'd plead guilty to child endangerment in exchange for probation and community service. No jail time. I was furious, ready to reject it immediately, but Brad counselled patience. Trials are risky, he explained. A jury might sympathise with her sacrifice narrative. They might see a young woman who gave up everything and made one terrible mistake. The plea guarantees a conviction, guarantees she'll have a record, guarantees supervision. I spent hours with Jonah processing this possibility. He helped me understand that justice doesn't always look like prison bars. Sometimes it's a lifetime of consequences, of closed doors, of living with a felony conviction that follows you forever. Sometimes it's knowing that everyone knows what you did, that your selfish choice is public record. After weeks of negotiation, we reached an agreement. Rachel would plead guilty to felony child endangerment resulting in death, 5 years probation with strict conditions, 500 hours of community service specifically with allergy awareness organizations, mandatory counselling twice a week, no unsupervised contact with any minor children, ever. And she had to pay $10,000 to establish a memorial fund in Mason's name. The plea hearing was the last time I saw Rachel in person. She stood before the judge, required to allocute to her crime, to admit in open court what she'd done. Her voice was flat and angry as she read the prepared statement, adding bitter comments about her sacrifices until the judge threatened to reject the plea entirely. The judge's final words to her were scathing. He'd reviewed all the evidence, he said, and while the plea agreement avoided trial, he wanted the record to be clear about the severity of her actions. She'd chosen herself over a child's life, had violated the most fundamental duty of care, had proven herself unfit to ever be trusted with children again. "You were given the privilege of caring for your siblings," he said, his voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "They trusted you, depended on you, loved you. And when one of them needed you most, you chose dinner. You chose yourself. You chose to let a 6-year-old child die rather than leave a restaurant. That choice will define you forever, as it should." After the sentencing, I focused on building something positive from our tragedy. The Mason Memorial Fund launched with the $10,000 from Rachel, but quickly grew as our story spread. Local businesses held fundraisers, schools did penny drives, and individuals who'd lost children to allergies or had struggled to afford EpiPens contributed what they could. Within 6 months, we'd provided free EpiPens to 43 families. Each one came with a card telling them about Mason, about the importance of always having emergency medication available, about how his memory would live on through their children's safety. Parents sent photos of their kids playing, celebrating birthdays, living the life Mason should have had. I received a letter from one mother that I keep framed on my desk. Her daughter had a reaction at a birthday party, but because of the EpiPen we'd provided, she was able to save her. "My Emma is alive because of your Mason," she wrote. "I think of your family every day and promise his death wasn't for nothing. Sophie thrived under stability and routine. Her grades improved, she made friends, she started laughing again." The supervised visits with Rachel were difficult. She'd come home quiet and withdrawn, but her therapist helped her process the complex emotions of loving someone who'd failed to protect her brother. Rachel tried to maintain her victim narrative even as consequences mounted. She couldn't find work with a felony conviction. She had to move back with our mother, who'd suddenly reappeared now that the hard work of raising children was done. Her social media became increasingly bitter, blaming me for ruining her life, claiming she was being persecuted for one mistake after years of sacrifice. But the truth was public record now. The court documents detailed her texts, her choices, her decision to finish dessert while Mason died. No amount of spin could change those facts. She'd had 70 minutes to save him and chose not to. She'd heard he was dying and ordered tiramisu. She'd been told he'd stopped breathing and worried about her date's opinion instead. 1 year after Mason's death, I stood at his grave with fresh flowers. Sophie held my hand, quiet but present, processing her own grief in her own way. The headstone was simple but perfect. Mason James Chen, beloved brother, 2016-2023. His memory lives on through lives saved. The Mason Memorial Fund had helped over 100 families by then. We'd partnered with local schools to provide training on recognizing allergic reactions. We'd worked with restaurants to improve allergen protocols. We'd turned one senseless death into systematic change that would prevent others. I thought about Rachel sometimes, wondered if she ever truly understood what she'd taken from us. Not just Mason's life, but the family we'd been. She'd raised us, yes, sacrificed for us, absolutely. But when it mattered most, when sacrifice would have meant something real, she'd chosen herself. And that choice had destroyed everything. The supervised visits with Sophie eventually stopped when Rachel violated probation by missing multiple counselling sessions. Sophie didn't seem upset by this development, had already started calling me her guardian instead of Rachel, had already adjusted to our new normal. We weren't replacing Rachel so much as moving forward without her, building a life where children's needs came first. Always. I graduated from community college that spring, walking across the stage with Sophie cheering from the audience. I'd changed my major to social work, inspired by Judith and the CPS workers who'd helped us navigate our tragedy. I wanted to be someone who protected children, who recognized dangers others might miss, who acted when action was needed. My acceptance letter to Ohio State's graduate program arrived on what would have been Mason's 8th birthday. The same program Rachel had given up to raise us. But I wouldn't be giving it up, I'd be honoring Mason's memory by becoming someone who could help other vulnerable children. Sophie and I would make it work together, the way family should. Life moved forward in ways both ordinary and profound. Sophie joined the school band, choosing clarinet because Mason had always said he wanted to play one. I worked part-time at a crisis nursery while attending graduate school, learning firsthand about the complexities of family preservation and child safety. We developed our own traditions: Sunday pancakes, Friday movie nights, annual trips to Cedar Point that Mason would have loved. The Mason Memorial Fund grew beyond what I'd ever imagined. We partnered with pharmaceutical companies to negotiate bulk EpiPen purchases. We developed educational programs for caregivers about allergy management. We created support groups for families who'd lost children to preventable allergic reactions. Each initiative felt like another way Mason's short life continued to matter. 5 years after his death, I received an unexpected message. It was from James, the man Rachel had been dating that fatal day. He'd thought about reaching out many times, he said, but hadn't known what to say. He wanted me to know that he thought about Mason often, that if he'd known the situation, he would have driven Rachel to the park immediately. He'd started volunteering with allergy awareness organizations, his own form of penance for unknowingly being part of the tragedy. I wrote back, telling him it wasn't his fault. He couldn't have known that the woman across from him was choosing tiramisu over her brother's life. He couldn't have known that her complaints about family obligations were happening while that family died. His response to learning the truth, volunteering, educating himself, trying to prevent future tragedies was more than Rachel had ever done. Rachel completed her probation without further violations, though she never showed genuine remorse. Her mandatory counseling sessions ended with her therapist noting minimal insight into her actions and persistent external blame. She aged out of the system unchanged, still convinced she was the victim in Mason's story. But the real story, Mason's story, lived on in ways that mattered. Every child who survived an allergic reaction because their family could afford an EpiPen. Every caregiver who recognized the signs of anaphylaxis because of our training programs. Every restaurant that improved their allergy protocols. Every life saved because one life was lost. Sophie graduated high school as salutatorian, her speech referencing the brother who'd taught her that every moment matters. She'd grown into a compassionate young woman who volunteered with the Memorial Fund, sharing her story with families navigating similar losses. She chose to study medicine, wanting to be the kind of doctor who could have saved Mason if he'd gotten help in time. I married Daniel, a fellow social worker who understood why I needed to check Sophie's backpack twice and why I kept EpiPens in every room of our house. Our wedding was small and perfect, with an empty chair for Mason decorated with his favorite superhero action figures. Sophie was my maid of honor, radiant in a dress the same blue as Mason's favorite jacket. When our son was born, we named him Mason Daniel, not to replace the brother we'd lost, but to honor his memory with new life. Sophie cried when we told her, holding her nephew with infinite gentleness, promising to tell him stories about his uncle who'd loved pirates and bicycles and dreams of playing clarinet. 10 years after that September day, I can say with certainty that justice was served, though not in the way I'd initially imagined. Rachel lost everything that mattered: her family, her reputation, her sense of self as the sacrificial caregiver. She gained a criminal record that would follow her forever, a scarlet letter marking her as someone who'd chosen herself over a child's life. But more importantly, Mason's death meant something. It forced changes in how families access emergency medications. It educated thousands about allergy management. It saved lives through the fund bearing his name. His 6 years on Earth created ripples that would extend far beyond what any of us could have imagined. I still think about that day at the park sometimes. Wonder what would have happened if I'd been more careful. If I'd double-checked his backpack, if I'd recognized the granola had peanuts. But Jonah helped me understand that I wasn't responsible for Rachel's choice. I'd called for help immediately, had done everything I could with what I had. The person with the power to save Mason had chosen not to. Rachel had raised us, yes. She'd sacrificed her teenage years and early 20s, absolutely. She'd been more of a mother than our biological mother, without question. But parenting isn't about credit or recognition or deserving breaks. It's about being there when it matters, especially when being there costs you something you want. That September afternoon, Rachel faced the kind of choice that defines a person forever. Save a child or finish lunch. Choose life or choose yourself. She chose herself, and that choice revealed who she'd always been underneath the martyrdom and the sacrifice narrative. Someone who could hear a child was dying and order dessert anyway. Mason never got to turn 7, never learned to ride that bicycle with the flame helmet, never played clarinet in the school band. But his legacy lives on in every EpiPen provided, every life saved, every family that doesn't have to suffer what we suffered. He mattered. His death mattered. And the sister who let him die for the price of a meal. She has to live with that choice forever. Has to wake up every day knowing she valued tiramisu over his heartbeat. Some might say I destroyed my family by pursuing justice. But Rachel destroyed our family the moment she decided her happiness mattered more than Mason's life. I simply held up a mirror to her choice, forced the world to see what she'd done in the harsh light of legal consequence. Mason deserved that much. He deserved to have someone fight for him the way she'd refused to. The last time I visited his grave, a woman was there with her young daughter leaving flowers at a nearby headstone. She recognized me, approached hesitantly, then hugged me with tears streaming down her face. Her daughter had survived an allergic reaction the previous year because they'd had an EpiPen from our fund. She wanted me to know, needed me to know, that Mason's death had saved her daughter's life. We stood there together, two mothers united by loss and salvation, watching our children, one living, one remembered in the fading afternoon light. And I knew with absolute certainty that every hard choice I'd made, every family relationship I'd sacrificed, every moment of doubt and pain and fury had been worth it. Because Mason mattered. His death mattered. And no amount of family loyalty could change that truth. Rachel took everything from him, his future, his dreams, his chance to grow up. But she couldn't take his legacy. She couldn't stop his story from saving others. She couldn't prevent his memory from meaning something profound and lasting and good. In the end, that's the only justice that really matters. Mason may be gone, but through the fund that bears his name, through the lives saved and the families spared our grief, he lives on. And that's a form of immortality that no selfish choice can ever take away.